The laughter echoed loudly across the deserted parking lot as Officers Mitchell and Harris secured the rough rope around his torso and wrists. They looked on with smug satisfaction, their expressions twisted with self-satisfaction, as the tall, broad-shouldered man resisted the strain. His suit, once perfectly clean, was now smeared with mud and dust. Before we jump in, drop a comment to let us know where you're tuning in from today. And if you're moved by stories of justice and redemption, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. The badge hidden beneath his coat was the one thing that could reveal who he truly was. "You like playing the hero, huh?" Mitchell sneered, pulling the rope tighter. "Bet you won't feel so tough after tonight," Harris added with a chuckle, taking out his phone. "Let's get a shot for the guys. Something to remember this by." The man remained silent, his dark eyes unflinching as he looked at them. "What's the matter? Got nothing to say?" Mitchell taunted, leaning in close. "Cat got your tongue. Or maybe you're just figuring out this isn't your kind of town." Neither officer saw the quiet authority in his gaze or the calm way he held himself. They only saw what they expected to see: a black man in the wrong place at the wrong time. Mitchell raised his phone and snapped a few photos. Harris poked him in the chest and sneered, "Smile for the camera, Chief." Oblivious to the irony, he smirked. Then the man finally spoke, his tone steady and commanding. "You're making a mistake." The laughter came to an abrupt stop. Mitchell took a step back, frowning. "What did you just say?" Mitchell asked. The man, locking eyes with both of them, repeated, "I said, you're making a mistake, but if you act quickly, I might just forget this ever happened." Harris laughed, his voice mocking. "Oh yeah? And just who do you think you are?" The man paused, letting the weight of the moment sink in. Finally, in a calm, measured tone, he answered, "I'm your new chief of police." A heavy silence fell over the parking lot. Mitchell and Harris exchanged uneasy glances, their previous confidence wavering. The sound of footsteps interrupted the stillness. A figure stepped out from the shadows, a flashlight cutting through the darkness. "Chief Grant," a voice called out. The color drained from Mitchell's face. The approaching officer froze, taking in the scene, a man tied to a pole, the two stunned officers standing beside him. What in the world is going on here? Before either Mitchell or Harris could speak, the man they had bound to the pole stood up as much as he could in the restraints. His voice was steady, and his gaze held firm. "Right on time," he said, this time addressing the newcomer. The officer hurried over, fumbling with the ropes. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. Once the ropes were undone, Chief Grant stepped forward, brushing off his sleeves. He turned to face Mitchell and Harris, both standing stiffly with expressions that mixed fear and disbelief. "What's your badge number, Officer Mitchell?" Grant asked, his voice calm, but with an edge that suggested a brewing storm. Mitchell stuttered, unable to form words. Harris, looking pale and wide-eyed, tried to back away, but the reality of what they had done weighed him down. Grant didn't wait for a response. He glanced over at the third officer, who stood by awkwardly, unsure of what to do. "Call the station," Grant instructed, "and let them know I'm bringing 2 officers in for disciplinary review." The officer nodded, his hands trembling as he reached for his radio. Grant turned back to Mitchell and Harris, his face unreadable. "You think this is funny?" he asked in a quiet voice. "We'll see who's laughing tomorrow." Mitchell and Harris stood frozen, realizing their fate hung in the balance. Chief Grant's voice took on a dangerous calm. "Tonight, you tied up the wrong man," he continued, "and by tomorrow, everyone will know." Earlier that day, the usually quiet town of Cedar Ridge had been bustling with activity, its residents going about their lives, unaware of the storm about to shake their community's very core. Chief Grant had only recently moved to town, ready to step into his new role. Known for his strong principles and dedication to justice, he was appointed to clean up a department marred by accusations of misconduct and prejudice. He arrived unannounced, opting to observe his new workplace without any formal introduction. His goal was to see firsthand how officers behaved when they thought no one of authority was watching. Back at the station, Mitchell and Harris were wrapping up their shift when they noticed Grant walking through town. Unaware of who he was and driven by their own biases, they assumed he didn't belong. "Hey, check that guy out," Mitchell said, nudging Harris. "Looks like he's out of place." "Yeah," Harris replied, squinting suspiciously. "Let's see what he's up to." They began following Grant, their suspicions and biases building with each step. When they finally approached him in the parking lot, unchecked authority took over, and things quickly spiraled. The night's events would set the stage for a reckoning that Cedar Ridge would not soon forget. As the night wore on, word started to spread, and calls flooded the station as rumors about the incident reached the townspeople. By the next morning, the whole town was buzzing, and Mitchell and Harris would be facing the consequences of their actions in a very public way. Meanwhile, Chief Grant stood in his office, reviewing their personnel files with an expression of quiet determination. This was only the beginning. The next morning, the Cedar Ridge Police Department was buzzing with unease. Officers whispered in groups, their eyes darting nervously toward the chief's office. The typically relaxed atmosphere was now filled with tension that could be felt in every corner of the building. Inside his office, Chief Grant sat calmly behind his desk, hands folded neatly in front of him. The open personnel files of Officers Mitchell and Harris lay before him, their disciplinary records now under close review. Next to them was a copy of the department's code of conduct, its pages marked with sticky notes and annotations. A knock at the door broke his concentration. "Come in," Grant said, his tone steady but firm. Sergeant O'Malley, the longest-serving officer in the department, entered, his grizzled face etched with concern. "Chief," he began, his voice hesitant, "the officers are getting restless. They've heard about last night's incident." Grant nodded, responding simply, "Good." He added, "Mitchell and Harris are waiting in the briefing room. They're nervous. And they should be." Grant's eyes stayed locked on O'Malley. "What they did goes against everything this department should stand for." O'Malley hesitated, then sighed. "I just want you to know, Chief, not everyone here is like them. There are good people on this force." Grant's expression softened slightly. "I know," he replied, "and I'll make sure the good ones have nothing to worry about. But those bad apples, they're finished." O'Malley gave a slight nod and left, quietly closing the door behind him. In the briefing room, Mitchell and Harris sat at a long table, their usual confidence replaced by nervous fidgeting. Harris tapped his foot anxiously, while Mitchell kept glancing at the wall clock. "Do you think he's really going to fire us?" Harris whispered. "Shut up, man," Mitchell snapped. "We don't even know what he's planning yet." The door swung open, and Chief Grant entered, commanding the room. The two officers instantly straightened, their eyes fixed on him. Without speaking, Grant walked to the head of the table and placed a folder in front of him, flipping it open to reveal photos taken the previous night. Photos of Grant, tied to a pole. The harsh glare of the phone flash illuminated his face in the photos. Mitchell's face turned pale. "Chief, we—" "Save it," Grant interrupted, his voice low and controlled. He picked up one of the photos, holding it up. "This is what you thought was funny," he said. "Humiliating a man. You didn't even bother to identify." Harris opened his mouth, but no words came out. Grant dropped the photo back onto the table. "You had no idea who I was. Yet you assumed you had the right to treat me like this. Why?" Because I didn't look like I belonged. Mitchell swallowed hard. It was just a misunderstanding, sir. Grant's eyes narrowed, his voice sharpening. A misunderstanding. You tied a man to a pole, laughed at him, took pictures, and you think you can dismiss it as a misunderstanding? Harris finally found his voice, though it was shaky. Chief, we didn't mean any harm. We didn't know. That's the problem, Grant shot back. You didn't know and you didn't care to find out. You saw a black man, and that was all you needed to assume the worst. The room fell silent except for the officer's hands, resting tensely on the table. Effective immediately. Both of you are suspended without pay. An internal investigation will determine whether you keep your badges. Mitchell and Harris stared at him, their faces a mixture of shock and fear. You can go now, Grant said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The two officers stood and walked out, their footsteps heavy with the weight of their actions. Grant watched them go, his expression unreadable. News spread quickly, and by midday, the local press had picked up the story. It was all anyone in Ridge Lake could talk about. Headlines blared across every screen and newspaper. Racist incident rocks Ridge Lake PD. New chief takes swift action. At the Ridge Lake Diner, a favorite gathering spot, the atmosphere was buzzing with conversation as patrons shared their opinions. I heard the new chief doesn't mess around, a man said, sipping his coffee. It's about time someone cleaned up that department, he added. But a woman nearby shook her head. What kind of town are we? If our own officers can't be trusted, this is embarrassing. At a booth near the window, a young woman named Carla scrolled through the news on her phone. A lifelong resident of Ridge Lake. She had seen her share of the town's darker side. But this felt different. This town's about to change, she murmured to herself. That evening, as Chief Grant prepared to leave the station, his phone buzzed. The number was unknown. Frowning, he answered. Before he could say anything, a distorted voice came over the line. You think you're a hero, Chief? You think you can just come here and ruin lives? Grant's grip on the phone tightened as the voice continued. You don't belong here, and if you don't back off, you'll regret it. The line went dead. Grant stared at his phone, his mind racing. Someone was watching him, and they had no intention of letting him clean up the department without a fight. Chief Grant sat in his dimly lit office, still holding the phone. The anonymous caller's words echoed in his mind. You'll regret it. Coming into Cedar Ridge as an outsider had its challenges, but this was something different. Whoever was behind that call wasn't just angry. They were prepared to threaten him to maintain the status quo. Grant leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. His instincts told him this wasn't just an empty threat. He picked up his desk phone and dialed Sergeant O'Malley's extension. Sergeant, Grant said when O'Malley answered, I need you to trace an incoming call to my cell. It just came through and it's concerning. Understood, Chief, O'Malley replied. I'll get on it right away. Are you all right? I'm fine, Grant said, though he wasn't entirely sure if that was true. Just let me know what you find. His mind was already shifting gears. Whoever had called him was likely connected to someone within the department or the town's close-knit circle. He knew he'd need to be careful, but he had no plans to back down. The next morning, Grant arrived at the station early. The usual buzz of activity was muted. Officers were noticeably quieter. His presence had shifted the department's atmosphere, and everyone felt it. As Grant settled into his office, O'Malley walked in holding a folder. Chief, he said, closing the door. I traced the call. It came from a burner phone. No way to trace who used it. Grant nodded, not surprised. Thanks, Sergeant. Keep this between us for now. Understood, O'Malley replied, though his brow furrowed with concern. You think this is connected to last night's incident? It's possible, Grant said. but it could also be someone who doesn't like the changes I'm bringing. O'Malley hesitated before speaking again. Chief, I've seen this town turn ugly when things don't go their way. If someone's willing to threaten you, they might be planning more than just phone calls. Grant leaned forward, meeting O'Malley's gaze. Then let them plan. I'm not here to make friends, Sergeant. I'm here to do my job, and I'll do whatever it takes to see it through. Later that day, Grant called a department-wide meeting. Officers filed into the briefing room, a mix of curiosity and unease on their faces. Mitchell and Harris were noticeably absent, their suspension a fresh reminder of the chief's no-nonsense approach. Grant stood at the front, commanding the room's attention. Last night, he began, I received a threat. Someone in this town, or in this department, thinks they can intimidate me into backing down. Let me be clear. That won't happen. The room was silent, every officer hanging on his words. This department has been under a cloud for too long, Grant continued. I was brought here to clean it up, and that's exactly what I intend to do. If any of you have a problem with that, you're welcome to turn in your badge. His gaze swept across the room, daring anyone to challenge him. No one moved. The people of Cedar Ridge deserve better, Grant said. And we're going to give it to them. That starts now. He paused, letting his words sink in, then dismissed them. The officers filed out, their expressions unreadable. Grant knew that some of them would resist the changes, but he also knew there were good officers among them. He just needed to find them. That evening, as Grant drove home, he noticed a car following him. At first, he dismissed it as a coincidence, but as he turned down quieter streets, the car stayed close behind. Grant's grip on the steering wheel tightened. He made a sudden turn down a side street, watching in his rear-view mirror as the car hesitated before continuing to follow. He pulled into a gas station, parking near the brightly lit entrance. The other car slowed as it passed, then sped off into the night. Grant's heart raced, but his face remained calm. He memorized the car's make and model, determined to find out who was behind this. The next morning, as Grant stepped out of his house, he froze. His car, parked in the driveway, had been vandalized. The windows were shattered, and the word "Leave" was spray-painted in bold red letters across the hood. Grant scanned the quiet neighborhood, his jaw clenched. Whoever was targeting him was getting bolder. This was no longer just about him. It was about the town, the department, and the battle for justice that had only just begun. Chief Grant stood in front of his vandalized car, his jaw tight as he took in the damage. The spray-painted message on the hood was a clear escalation, but it only solidified his resolve. Whoever was behind this wanted him out of Cedar Ridge, but they had underestimated him. He pulled out his phone and snapped a few photos of the car before calling Sergeant O'Malley. "O'Malley," he said, as soon as the sergeant answered, "I need you to send a patrol car to my house. My car's been vandalized. Looks like we've got a more serious threat on our hands." "I'm on it, Chief," O'Malley replied. "You all right?" "I'm fine. Just make sure the patrol gets here soon." Within minutes, a patrol car pulled up to Grant's house. Officer Ramirez, one of the younger members of the force, stepped out, her face tense as she surveyed the damage. "Chief, this looks bad," she said in a low voice. "It's meant to," Grant replied. "Take a full report and make sure the photos are logged. I want this on record." Ramirez nodded and got to work, snapping pictures and noting every detail. Grant could see the concern in her eyes, but she didn't waver. That was a good sign. Back at the station, Grant called a private meeting with O'Malley and Ramirez. "This isn't just about me," Grant began, placing the photos of his car on the table. "It's about control. Someone or a group of people doesn't want this department to change. They're willing to intimidate me to keep things as they are." O'Malley leaned forward, his expression grim. "You think it's someone inside the department?" It's possible, Grant said, but it could also be someone with influence in the town. Either way, we're dealing with more than just idle threats. Ramirez hesitated before speaking. Chief, if they're willing to go this far, what's stopping them from doing something worse? Grant met her gaze. Nothing, he said. That's why we need to stay ahead of them. He laid out his plan. Increased patrols around his home, random checks on department personnel, and a discreet investigation into any suspicious activity in town. They would operate quietly, gathering evidence without tipping off whoever was behind the threats. This is a war, Grant said, his voice steady, but we're going to fight it our way. No fear, no hesitation. The next few days passed in a tense blur. Grant threw himself into his work, determined to lead by example. He met with community leaders, reviewed department protocols, and even took time to speak with concerned residents. His presence was felt everywhere, a constant reminder that he wasn't backing down. But the threats didn't stop. One night, as Grant reviewed case files in his office, a package was delivered to the station. It had no return address and was marked urgent. The desk clerk, Officer Ross, brought it to Grant's office, his face pale. "Chief, this came for you," Ross said, setting the package on Grant's desk. Grant eyed the package, his instincts immediately on high alert. He carefully opened it, revealing a single item inside. A bullet, along with a note. Ross's eyes widened. "Chief?" "Calm down," Grant said, though his mind was already racing. He picked up the phone and called O'Malley. "Sergeant, I need you in my office. Now." O'Malley arrived moments later, his expression darkening when he saw the package's contents. "This is escalating quickly," O'Malley said in a low voice. Grant nodded. "We need to find out who's behind this, and fast. Have the forensics team check the package for prints or any other trace evidence." "I'll get on it," O'Malley said, taking the package carefully. That night, as Grant drove home in a station-issued car, his phone buzzed again. This time, the message was a video. He pulled over to watch it. The footage showed his house, recorded from a distance. The camera zoomed in on his living room window, where Grant's wife and young daughter were visible, laughing and playing. The attached message read, "You think you're untouchable? Think again." Grant's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about him anymore. His family was now in danger. Chief Grant gripped the steering wheel, his heart pounding as he replayed the video. The sight of his wife and daughter, oblivious to the threat looming over them, ignited a fear he hadn't felt in years. This was personal now. Whoever was behind this knew exactly how to hurt him. He immediately called his wife. The phone rang twice before she answered, her voice cheerful. "Hey, honey, are you on your way home?" "Sarah," Grant said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Listen to me carefully. Lock all the doors and windows. Make sure Mia stays away from the front of the house." There was a pause. "What's going on, Marcus?" "I'll explain everything when I get there. Just do it now." Her tone shifted, serious and concerned. "All right. Be careful." "I will," Grant said, before hanging up. He took a deep breath, trying to push down the rising panic. He needed to stay focused. As he pulled back onto the road, he called O'Malley. "Sergeant," Grant said as soon as the line connected, "I need a unit posted outside my house. Discreet, but they need to be there tonight." "You got it, Chief," O'Malley replied without hesitation. "Is everything okay?" "No," Grant admitted. "But it will be. I'll see to that." When Grant arrived home, he found Sarah standing at the door, her face pale but determined. She ushered him inside, where Mia was sitting on the couch, clutching a stuffed animal. "What's happening, Dad?" Mia asked, her young eyes filled with worry. Grant knelt in front of her, forcing a smile. "Just a little trouble at work, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about." He kissed her forehead, and turned to Sarah, who was watching him intently. "We need to talk," he said quietly. They moved to the kitchen, where Grant showed her the video. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide. Sarah whispered, "Who would do this?" Grant replied, "Someone who doesn't want me here. They think they can scare me off, but now they've crossed a line." Sarah nodded, her fear mingling with determination. "What do we do?" she asked. "I've already got officers watching the house," Grant said. "But we need to stay vigilant. I'll also make arrangements for you and Mia to go somewhere safe if things escalate." Sarah reached over, squeezing his hand. "We'll get through this, Marcus. Together." The next day at the station, Grant gathered his top officers, including O'Malley and Ramirez, for a meeting. He played the video for them, and their faces darkened as they watched. "This is the level of threat we're dealing with," Grant said. "It's not just about me anymore. My family is involved, and that changes everything." Ramirez spoke up, her voice resolute. "Chief, we need to take the offensive. Whoever's behind this is getting bolder, and we can't afford to wait for them to make the next move." "I agree," Grant said. "That's why we're launching a full investigation. We're going to dig into every lead and any suspicious activity," Grant continued. "I also want increased patrols around key areas in town. No one gets to feel safe while they're threatening our community." O'Malley nodded. "We're with you, Chief. We'll find out who's behind this." Later that afternoon, Grant sat alone in his office sifting through files. He had requested records of all major incidents involving the department over the past 5 years, hoping to find patterns or names that might stand out. As he worked, his phone buzzed with a new message. "Check your email." Grant opened his laptop, finding an email with the subject line, "Time's running out." Attached was a photo of his daughter, taken that morning as she left for school. The rage simmering beneath Grant's composed exterior threatened to erupt. He began pacing as he called O'Malley. "They're watching my family, Sergeant," Grant said, his voice strained. "They sent a picture of Mia," Carter cursed under his breath. "They're getting desperate." "We'll lock this town down if we have to," Grant said. "We might not have a choice." "Get Ramirez and meet me in the war room," he instructed. "We're going to map this out and investigate every possible lead." As Grant hung up, the station's power abruptly went out. The familiar hum of fluorescent lights and electronics was replaced by an eerie silence. Moments later, the emergency lights flickered on, casting the station in a dim, reddish glow. Grant stepped into the hallway, noticing the unease among the officers. "Chief," Ramirez called, jogging toward him. "We've got a situation." She led him to the front desk, where a handwritten note had been left. "You can't protect everyone." Grant's eyes narrowed, realizing this was no longer just about threats. It was psychological warfare, and the stakes were higher than ever. In the dim emergency lighting, officers scrambled to regain control. The handwritten note sat ominously on the front desk, its message weighing on everyone's minds. Grant picked it up, studying the crude handwriting. "You can't protect everyone." The gravity of the words settled on him, but he refused to show it. His team needed to see confidence, not fear. "Sergeant Carter," he called, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Do we have any information on how this note got here?" Carter shook his head. "Nothing yet, Chief. The front desk clerk stepped away for only a minute. No one saw anyone come in." Grant nodded, quickly processing the possibilities. "Get the surveillance footage from all station cameras. If someone slipped in, we'll find them." "We're on it," Carter replied, signaling a team to action. Grant turned to Ramirez. "I want every officer on high alert. No one enters or leaves the station without clearance." "Understood, Chief," Ramirez replied, her face set with resolve. Ramirez confirmed her orders with a determined expression. As the power gradually returned, The tension in the station lingered. Grant gathered Carter, Ramirez, and a few trusted officers in the war room to review the surveillance footage. The grainy video displayed the front desk area, showing that at precisely 11:03 p.m., the desk clerk briefly stepped away, leaving the desk unattended. Within that minute, a shadowy figure slipped in, dropping the note before quietly exiting. "Rewind that," Grant ordered, leaning forward. Carter replayed the footage. The figure wore a hoodie, their face obscured by shadows. "Pause," Grant said, as the figure momentarily turned toward the camera. Though the face was hidden, the build was vaguely familiar. "Enhance this frame," he instructed. "Find any identifying features." Despite the officer's efforts to enhance the image, the figure remained unrecognizable, leaving Grant's patience stretched thin. "They're taunting us," Ramirez broke the silence. "Whoever this is wants us to know they can reach us any time." "And they think they can scare us into backing down," Grant added, his jaw set. "But we're not giving them that satisfaction." He turned to the team. "Double the patrols tonight. I want eyes on every vulnerable spot in town. If they so much as breathe in the wrong direction, I want to know about it." That night, Grant returned home to find 2 patrol cars discreetly stationed down the street. Inside, Sarah waited, her eyes brimming with questions. "Anything new?" she asked as he set his bag down. "They left a note at the station," Grant explained, "but we're tightening security. They won't catch us off guard again." Sarah nodded, though worry lingered in her expression. "And Mia?" she asked softly. "She's safe," Grant assured her. "We'll keep it that way." Grant spent the night on high alert, his police scanner humming quietly. Every outside noise heightened his awareness. But the night passed without incident. By morning, Grant felt a renewed sense of determination. The next day, Grant arranged a meeting with the town's mayor and key community leaders. As officials gathered in the City Hall meeting room, murmurs of curiosity and concern filled the air. Their faces showed a mix of worry and interest. "Thank you all for coming," Grant began, his voice steady. "As you may have heard, there have been escalating threats aimed at my family and me. But this isn't just about us. It's about the future of this town." The room fell silent as Grant continued. "Cedar Ridge has a problem. For too long, certain people have acted with impunity, thinking they're above the law. My role here is to change that. But I can't do it alone." The mayor, a middle-aged man with a firm demeanor, nodded. "What do you need from us, Chief?" "Support," Grant said plainly. "I need the community to stand united with us. If we're going to root out corruption and intimidation, we have to show them that we're together on this." Murmurs of agreement spread across the room, though some faces displayed apprehension. One of the local business owners, an older man named Mr. Thompson, spoke up. "Chief, some folks here don't like change. They're comfortable with the way things are. You're shaking things up, and that makes people nervous." "Good," Grant replied, his tone unwavering. "Change is exactly what this town needs." As the meeting concluded and Grant stepped outside City Hall, he noticed a black SUV parked across the street. Its tinted windows prevented him from seeing inside, but he could feel eyes on him. The SUV didn't move as he approached his car, keeping his posture relaxed despite the tension building inside. Just as he unlocked his car door, his phone buzzed. A new text message flashed on the screen. "You can't stop us, Chief. Watch your back." Grant glanced up, but the SUV was already pulling away into traffic. His jaw tightened as he got into his car. Whoever was behind these threats had no intention of stopping, but neither did he. Grant drove back to the station, his mind racing. The message from the shadowy figure in the SUV wasn't just a threat. It was a declaration of war. He knew he couldn't afford to wait for their next move. This time, he'd take the fight to them. As soon as Grant arrived back at the station, he called an emergency meeting with O'Malley, Ramirez, and a few trusted officers. They gathered in the war room, their faces solemn and attentive. "Listen up," Grant began, placing his phone on the table, displaying the latest message. "They're watching us, tracking our moves, and they're now brazen enough to make contact in broad daylight. It's time we turn the tables." He pulled out a map of Cedar Ridge, marking the locations of recent incidents. "We've been on the defense, but that stops now. We're going to find them and shut them down." O'Malley nodded in agreement. "What's the plan, Chief?" "First, we track the black SUV," Grant said. "Ramirez, I want you to pull traffic camera footage from every intersection around City Hall. Cross-reference it with footage from the station. We'll pinpoint where it came from and where it went." "On it," Ramirez replied, already typing on her laptop. Grant turned to O'Malley. "Coordinate with the forensics team. I want a full analysis of the note from last night. Any trace evidence, no matter how small, could lead us to whoever's behind this." "Understood," O'Malley replied. Grant's gaze swept over the team. "We're dealing with someone who knows how to stay hidden, but everyone makes mistakes. We're going to find theirs." A few hours later, Ramirez called Grant and O'Malley into the surveillance room. "I found something," she said, pointing to her screen. The footage showed the black SUV parked near City Hall before it began following Grant. She traced its path backward through several intersections, eventually leading to an industrial area on the outskirts of town. "This is where it gets interesting," Ramirez said, pulling up additional footage showing the SUV entering a warehouse parking lot. "What about the plates?" Grant asked. "Fake," Ramirez replied, "but the warehouse is registered to a shell company. I'm digging into its ownership now." Grant's mind was already working through the possibilities. "Good work. We've got a lead." O'Malley crossed his arms. "What's the move, Chief? We could get a warrant and raid the place." "Not yet," Grant said. "If they're watching us, they'll know if we go in too hard, too fast. We need to do this quietly." That night, Grant and Ramirez conducted a covert surveillance operation at the warehouse. Dressed in plain clothes, Grant and Ramirez parked a safe distance away, using binoculars to monitor the warehouse. The building looked quiet, with no signs of activity outside, but Grant's instincts told him it was more than it appeared. "Chief," Ramirez said softly, pointing. "There's movement." Grant focused on the side entrance, spotting a man in a dark hoodie step out, lighting a cigarette. The man lingered a few minutes before disappearing back inside. "We've got people inside," Grant said. "Let's see who else shows up." For hours, they watched as individuals arrived and departed, each looking more suspicious than the last. Grant made mental notes of their appearances and behaviors, determined to identify each one. Just before midnight, the warehouse lights flickered off and the building fell silent with no more movement. "We've seen enough for tonight," Grant said, starting the car. "Let's regroup and figure out our next steps." The next morning, Grant called in a favor from an old FBI contact, Agent Cooper. Over the phone, he briefed Cooper on the situation, the threats, and their investigation into the warehouse. "You're walking a tightrope, Marcus," Cooper warned. "If these guys are as dangerous as they seem, you need to tread carefully." "I know," Grant replied. "That's why I need your help. Any resources or intel you can provide would be invaluable." "I'll see what I can do," Cooper assured. "But watch your back. These kinds of people don't play by the rules." Later that day, as Grant reviewed surveillance notes in his office, a sudden explosion rocked the station. The building shook, the sound of shattering glass and falling debris filling the air. "Chief!" Carter burst in, coughing from the dust. "It came from the parking lot." Grant grabbed his jacket and rushed outside, his eyes widening at the sight of a patrol car, a charred, twisted wreck still smoldering from the blast. A crowd of officers and onlookers gathered, their faces painted with shock and fear. Grant's heart sank as he realized this was no accident. This was a message, and the stakes had just been raised to a deadly level. The thick smell of smoke hung in the air as Grant surveyed the scene. The patrol car, now a smoldering heap of metal, stood as a grim testament to the escalating threat. Officers scrambled to cordon off the area, with radios crackling with urgent reports. "Everyone, stay back!" Grant commanded, taking charge. "Secure the perimeter and get the fire department here, now!" Carter was already on his radio, summoning reinforcements, while Ramirez joined Grant, her face pale but resolute. "Chief, this wasn't just a threat," she said, her voice steady in the midst of chaos. "They're making it clear they'll go as far as it takes." Grant nodded, his mind racing. This wasn't just about intimidation anymore. It was an outright assault on the department. Moments later, the fire department arrived, spraying foam over the wreck to douse the flames. Grant stepped back, his eyes fixed on the scene as his thoughts were interrupted by Mayor Daniels, who pushed through the growing crowd. "Grant," the mayor called out, his face a mix of anger and fear. "What in God's name is going on?" Grant met him halfway, his expression somber. "An attack. Plain and simple. Someone's trying to send a message." "This is outrageous," Daniels said, glancing at the wreck. "The town's already on edge. If word of this gets out—" "Word's already out, Mayor," Grant interrupted. "We need to act fast before this escalates even further." Daniels sighed heavily. "What's your next move?" Grant didn't hesitate. "We're going to find out who's responsible, and we're going to shut them down." Later that day, Grant assembled a special task force in the station's war room. Ramirez, Carter, and a few trusted officers gathered around, their faces set with determination. "Here's where we are," Grant began, pointing to a map of Cedar Ridge with key locations marked, including the warehouse. "We've confirmed the warehouse is a hub for their operations. Tonight, we're going in." Carter raised an eyebrow. "A raid?" Grant nodded. "But it's not just a standard raid. We'll move in quietly and take them by surprise. I've coordinated with my FBI contact, so we'll have backup if things go south." Ramirez leaned forward. "What's the goal, Chief? Are we just looking to shut them down or gather intel?" "Both," Grant replied. "We need to dismantle their operation and get to the people at the top. This ends now." As night fell, Grant's team geared up, moving in unmarked vehicles, carefully approaching the warehouse. The industrial area was eerily silent, the only sounds being the creak of metal and distant hum of machinery. Grant and Ramirez led the team. Their movements were swift and deliberate as they positioned themselves outside the warehouse, awaiting Grant's signal. "Everyone in position," Grant whispered into his radio. "Ready," came Carter's voice. "Let's move," Grant said. The team breached the warehouse in silence, weapons drawn. Inside, the dimly lit space was cluttered with crates, machinery, and a few scattered figures who froze upon seeing the officers. "Police, don't move," Ramirez shouted. Chaos erupted as the suspects scrambled. One attempted to flee, but was swiftly tackled by Carter. Another reached for a weapon, but Grant was faster, disarming him with a shot to the arm. Within minutes, the team had secured the area, and the suspects were handcuffed and seated on the floor. Grant approached one of the men, a wiry figure with a defiant glare. "Who's running this operation?" he demanded, crouching in front of him with a dangerous edge in his voice. "You think this is a game?" Grant continued. "You just escalated to bombing police property. That puts you in a whole new category of trouble." The man's defiance wavered momentarily, but he remained silent. "Take them in," Grant ordered. "We'll get them to talk at the station." As the team prepared to transport the suspects, Grant's radio crackled with a frantic message. "Chief, we've got a situation back at the station." "What's going on?" Grant asked, his voice sharp. "There's been another explosion, this time inside the building. The holding cells are compromised. We have injured officers." Grant's heart sank. The fight was far from over, and the enemy was more ruthless than he'd imagined. The urgency of the radio call, echoed in Grant's mind as he and his team rushed back to the station. The drive was tense, every second weighed down by the gravity of their sanctuary being breached. When they arrived, the scene was worse than Grant had anticipated. Smoke billowed from the side of the station, officers scrambling to assist the injured while paramedics tended to those caught in the blast. Grant jumped out of the car, assessing the chaos. "Carter, get a full damage report. Ramirez, secure the perimeter. I want to know exactly how this happened." Officers nodded, sprinting into action as Grant pushed through the smoke-filled hallway toward the holding cells. The metal bars of one cell were twisted from the explosion, and the walls were scorched black. Officer Ross approached, her face streaked with soot. "We've accounted for most of the detainees, but 2 of the suspects in custody are missing. We think they escaped during the chaos." Grant clenched his fists. "They planned this. They wanted those men out." Ross nodded grimly. "It looks that way, sir. We're reviewing the surveillance footage, but the blast knocked out most of the cameras." Grant exhaled slowly, steadying himself. "Double-check the footage," he ordered. "Even if the cameras went down, we might catch something just before the explosion." "Yes, sir," Ross replied, before hurrying off. An hour later, Grant gathered his team in what remained of the war room. The station's power had been restored, but the atmosphere remained tense. Ramirez pulled up the partial surveillance footage on the screen. "This is the best we got, Chief," she said. The footage cut off moments before the blast. They watched as 2 hooded figures entered through a side door, moving with clear purpose. One of them carried a small device, likely the bomb. "These guys knew exactly where to go," Ramirez observed. "They avoided main areas and went straight to the holding cells." Grant leaned closer. "Pause it there. Can we get a clearer look at their faces?" Ramirez enhanced the image, but the figures remained largely obscured. Grant's frustration was evident. "They had help," he said finally. "Someone on the inside gave them access and information." The room fell silent as the weight of his words settled. "You're saying one of us is working with them?" Carter asked quietly. "I don't see any other explanation," Grant replied, a grim determination in his voice. "We need to root out the mole before they do any more damage." The next day, Grant met with Mayor Daniels in a private office at City Hall. The mayor's face was drawn, the strain of recent events evident. "Chief, this town is on the verge of panic," Daniels said. 2 explosions in less than 24 hours, and now suspects have escaped from police custody. "We're handling it, Mayor," Grant said firmly. "But we need your support. Whoever's behind this isn't just targeting the department. They're threatening the stability of the entire town." Daniels stopped pacing and looked at Grant intently. "What do you need from me?" "We need to lock this town down," Grant replied. "Increase patrols, implement curfews in high-risk areas, and keep the public informed but calm." Daniels nodded, though his expression remained anxious. "I'll make the calls, Chief, but I expect results." "You'll have them," Grant promised, as he and his team dove into action at the station. They were ready to move on the farm. As the team prepped for the raid, Grant's phone buzzed with a chilling alert. This time, it wasn't a simple message. It was a live video feed. On his screen, Sarah and Mia were tied up in a dark, unfamiliar room, with a masked figure standing ominously behind them, holding a weapon. The figure spoke directly into the camera, the distorted voice echoing throughout the station. "Chief Grant, you've been a thorn in our side for too long. If you want your family back, call off your investigation. You have 24 hours. The video abruptly ended, leaving Grant in stunned silence. His family was now at the mercy of his enemies, and every second counted. The station had fallen silent, the weight of the situation palpable. Grant stood motionless, the haunting image of Sarah and Mia etched into his mind. Clenching his jaw, he forced himself to stay composed. "Chief?" Ramirez broke the silence. What's our move? Grant turned to his team, his voice steady despite the storm brewing within. We keep going, we find them, and we bring my family home. Carter gave a determined nod. We've got a lead on that farm. It's a long shot, but it's our best bet, Grant said, considering their options. We'll split our resources. Ramirez, take half the team and establish a command center to trace the live feed. They might let something slip and give us a location. Turning to Carter, Grant added, You're with me. We're raiding that farm. Ramirez hesitated. Chief, are you sure about dividing the team? This could be a setup. Grant's resolve was unwavering. It's a risk we have to take. Time's running out. As the team mobilized, Grant got a call from Agent Cooper. Marcus, I just heard about your family. I'm dispatching a tactical unit to back you up at the farm. Thanks, Doug, Grant replied, his voice laden with gratitude. We can use every bit of help. And Marcus, Cooper cautioned, be careful. Desperate people can be unpredictable. I know, Grant answered, but so can I. The drive to the farm was tense, with Carter by his side, eyes scanning the deserted country roads. The engine's low hum was the only sound breaking the silence as they neared the farm. Grant switched off the headlights and eased the car off the road, pulling up just short of the farmhouse, its windows dark and foreboding. Looks abandoned, Carter observed, inspecting his weapon. That's exactly what they want us to think, Grant replied. He grabbed his radio. Ramirez, we're in position. Got any updates? Still working on tracking the feed, Chief, Ramirez responded, her voice steady. Grant nodded, knowing she couldn't see him. Copy that. We're going in. He and Carter moved carefully toward the farmhouse, weapons drawn. The night was eerily quiet, every step crunching on the gravel. At the front door, Grant signaled Carter to cover him, then kicked it open, and they quickly stepped inside. The air inside was stale, and the old wooden floor creaked beneath them. They cleared room after room on the first floor, each one filled with dusty furniture and nothing but emptiness. Frustration began to build in Grant with each empty space. Clear, Carter said, lowering his weapon as they reached the last room. Maybe the tip was off. But Grant caught a faint sound, a quiet hum coming from below. He gestured for Carter to follow, leading him to a door in the kitchen that revealed a stairway descending into darkness. As they went down, the hum grew louder, the air turning cold around them. At the bottom, they stumbled upon a makeshift control room. Monitors, radios, and computers lined the walls, displaying various live feeds around town. This is it, Carter murmured. Grant's eyes landed on a screen showing a paused video of Sarah and Mia. His heartbeat quickened as he approached. We're close, he said, voice tense. This is their base. Suddenly, they heard footsteps above them. Grant and Carter shared a look and took cover behind a row of shelves. Two men, armed with guns, entered the basement, speaking in hushed tones. The boss wants us to pack up and clear out, one of them said. They're getting too close. Fine by me, the other replied. Let's grab the equipment and move. Grant didn't hesitate. He stepped out from behind cover, aiming his gun at them. Drop your weapons now. The men froze for a moment before one tried to reach for his gun. Carter was faster, firing a shot that grazed his shoulder. The other man dropped his weapon, raising his hands. All right, don't shoot. Grant stepped closer, his gun still trained on them. Where are they? He demanded. Where's my family? The man stammered, I don't know. We don't handle that. We just keep the feeds running. Grant grabbed him by the collar, his gaze intense. Who does? Who's behind this? The man hesitated, fear plain on his face. You're too late, he whispered. They're already on the move. Before Grant could push him further, his radio crackled. Chief, we've traced the feed. Ramirez's voice came through. It's coming from an old factory, on the east side of town. Grant released the man, shifting focus. "We're on our way. Secure this place and bring these two in," he instructed. Carter called for backup as Grant raced up the stairs. On the drive to the factory, Grant's phone buzzed with a new message. It was another video. This time, he watched as Sarah and Mia were loaded into the back of a van, with the masked figure from before looking directly into the camera. "Time's almost up, Chief," the voice taunted. "If you're not at the factory within the hour, you'll never see them again." Grant's grip on the wheel tightened, his resolve hardening. He had under an hour to save his family, and failure was not an option. His car tore through Ridge Lake's quiet streets, the urgency of the ticking clock pushing him faster. As the old factory loomed in the distance, he radioed, "Status update, Ramirez." She responded, "Backup units are en route, Chief." "ETA is 10 minutes. Grant's voice was tense. "We don't have 10 minutes. I'm going in." "Understood. We'll be right behind you," Ramirez replied. Grant pulled up to the factory, turned off the engine, and stepped out, weapon at the ready. Every sound seemed amplified in the thick tension. He approached the main entrance, slipping through slightly open doors with his senses on high alert. The factory's interior was a maze of old machinery, broken conveyor belts, and stacked pallets. Dim lights hung from the ceiling, casting long, eerie shadows across the room. In the distance, Grant could hear muffled voices. He followed them, moving cautiously until he reached an open area where a group of armed men stood around a van. Inside, he saw Sarah and Mia, their hands and feet bound, faces pale but defiant. The man in charge, recognizable from the video, was standing separate, giving orders, his masked face calm and focused. "Get them out now," the leader commanded. "The chief won't make it in time." Stepping out of the shadows, Grant leveled his gun at the group. "Wrong," he said, voice cold and unwavering. The men froze, heads turning in shock. "Let them go," Grant continued, "or I guarantee none of you leave here." The leader chuckled, unfazed. "Ah, Chief Grant, right on schedule. But you're outnumbered. You can't take us all." Grant didn't flinch. "I don't need to." Before the leader could respond, the sound of a door crashing open echoed through the factory. Ramirez and her team stormed in, shouting commands. "Drop your weapons," she ordered. Caught off guard, most of the men hesitated. One lunged at Grant, but he quickly disarmed him with a swift punch. Chaos erupted as gunfire echoed, but the police swiftly gained control, forcing the rest of the men to surrender. Within minutes, all suspects were subdued, weapons seized, and Sarah and Mia were freed. Grant rushed to them, hands shaking as he untied the ropes. "Are you okay?" he asked, voice thick with emotion. "We're fine," Sarah answered, pulling Mia close. "But they said they'd kill us if you didn't come." Grant's jaw clenched. "They won't hurt anyone ever again." He helped them out of the van, scanning the scene for any remaining threats. However, the leader was nowhere to be found. "Ramirez!" Grant called out. "The leader's still here. Lock down the area." She nodded, organizing a search team to sweep the factory. As Grant guided Sarah and Mia to the safety of police vehicles, he heard the ominous sound of a gun cocking behind him. Turning, he saw the masked leader stepping out from the shadows, gun aimed at Grant. "Did you really think it would end like this?" the leader sneered, removing his mask to reveal a face Grant had never seen before, but knew he wouldn't forget. "This isn't over." The leader's finger moved on the trigger, but before Grant could react, a gunshot rang out. The shot echoed, a deafening punctuation in the tense air. Instinctively, Grant shielded Sarah and Mia, bracing for the worst. When he looked up, the leader was clutching his shoulder, staggering backward. Ramirez emerged from behind a stack of pallets, her weapon still aimed at the man. "Drop it," she commanded firmly. The leader winced from his injury, but still attempted a defiant glare. "You think this changes anything?" he sneered, allowing the gun to fall to the floor. "Hands where I can see them," Grant ordered, as Ramirez secured the weapon. The leader raised his hands reluctantly, blood trickling from his wound onto the dusty ground. "Get him in cuffs," Grant said, his voice steady but intense. Carter moved swiftly, restraining the leader's hands behind his back. As they led the man away, Grant turned to Ramirez. "Nice shot," he said, the tension in his tone softening a bit. "Thanks," she replied, a grim but satisfied smile crossing her face. Outside, Sarah and Mia sat wrapped in blankets in the back of an ambulance as paramedics checked them over. Grant stood nearby, watching them with a blend of relief and simmering anger. "They're safe," Ramirez said quietly, stepping up beside him. "For now," Grant replied. "But this isn't just about them anymore. This whole town has been held hostage by fear, and it won't stop until we take down every last one of these people." Carter joined them, his expression sober. "We've got the leader in custody, but he's staying quiet. Standard tough guy act." Grant nodded. "He'll talk. They always do." Back at the station, Grant faced the leader in the interrogation room, where the man sat handcuffed to the table. Though his initial confidence had faded, a smirk lingered on his face. "You're wasting your time," the leader said, reclining slightly. "You think locking me up is the end? There are more of us. You'll never stop the movement." Grant leaned in, his voice ice cold. "Your movement ends here. You thought you could terrorize my town, my family, and get away with it. But I guarantee you every last one of you will fall." The leader laughed, but an edge of doubt glinted in his eyes. "Big talk, Chief. But you don't know what you're dealing with." Grant straightened, folding his arms. "We'll see about that." Leaving the room, Grant joined Ramirez and Carter in the observation area. "He'll break," Grant said. "They always do once they realize the walls are closing in." "And if he doesn't?" Carter asked. "Then we find another way," Grant replied. "This isn't just about him. It's about dismantling the whole network. We've got leads, and we'll chase every single one until this town is clean." Over the next few days, the investigation ramped up. Grant's team uncovered a complex web of corruption and crime extending far beyond the initial suspects. With intel from the farm and warehouse, they began dismantling key components of the organization. The community, once paralyzed by fear, started feeling hopeful. Grant's leadership had not only brought justice, but also renewed faith in the police department. Weeks later, Grant stood on the steps of the Cedar Ridge Police Department, addressing a crowd of reporters and community members. "Today marks a new chapter for our town," he said, his voice strong and steady. "We faced threats, corruption, and violence, but we stood together. Cedar Ridge is stronger because of it." He glanced at Sarah and Mia in the front row, their smiles a reminder of why he fought so fiercely. "We're not just rebuilding a department," Grant continued. "We're rebuilding trust, and that begins right now." As applause erupted from the crowd, Grant felt a deep sense of closure. The battle had been difficult, but justice had prevailed, and while there was still work ahead, one thing was certain: Cedar Ridge would never be the same again.